it's good to be here, and I'll try to hopefully enlighten you all on what I know about it. I'm going to be speaking on my own behalf, not as a spokesperson for the Assembly or anything like that, but one that's had a front row seat and been right there with it since its infancy. So I hope what I can do will enlighten you on where I at least think we're at now, where we came from, where we're at, and where we're going. Before I get into this, and you'll notice the PowerPoint presentation doesn't have my name on it because I'm stealing somebody else's PowerPoint. And the reason I am is because it's the latest hot off the press PowerPoint. A few days ago, a week ago in Cleveland, there was a presentation, a forum on the Assembly of Bishops that was organized in Cleveland by somebody in this room. And Eddie did a great job. They had over 300 people attend from all jurisdictions. Significant numbers of priests and a couple of the bishops from the Assembly were able to participate. And there was a lot of interest and activity. And the presentation on that was made by Protodeacon Peter Danilchek, who's also spoken to OCL, I believe, last year. And he gave a presentation, and at this time it was expanding on what last year and kind of the latest developments. And also you can go to the Assembly's website, and his presentation is already posted and up there in video form. I'm not going to repeat his presentation, but I'm going to utilize it and give you my own comments as we go. But as a beginning, I want to let you know where I'm coming from on this, my perspective, my view, because I have maybe a different approach to all of this, and I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. I'm an attorney. I'm also a CPA. I'm kind of obsessively organized kind of person. I like to make things, process things and make things happen. And I've been active in the church for about over 30 years. Started out working in Orthodox youth ministry. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. I'm Antiochian. But as part of my work, we started to do some things in youth ministry back in the 70s that hadn't been done, and started to get a view of orthodoxy and the need for a unified approach to the church. When I went to law school, I got very involved in campus ministry when maybe there was only a handful of OCFs in the country. We did it and hit head on into the issues and challenges of Orthodox disunity, and really believed in and that we needed to solve it, that if we're going to make America Orthodox or give a common face, we got to do it right, and there's a way to do it. We weren't doing it right. I became blessed about over 20 years ago to become the president of the Virginia Farah Foundation, which was one of the largest, and is the largest foundations one of the largest in the Orthodox world, that focuses entirely on funding Orthodox projects, programs, and organizations with the idea to grow the church and to make it happen. The bulk of our funding is in the United States. And when we started, the church was somewhat disjointed. There were people with ideas, a lot of people with great ideas, but maybe not knowing how to take something and take it from point A to point B, take an idea and make it a reality. So we became very strict in our due diligence, very strict in being stewards of our funds, and very strong about that people that came to us better have a good vision and they better know how to make it happen. That doesn't mean we weren't wanting to be entrepreneurial, but we wanted organizations and structures that were done well and were done to last and to achieve whatever somebody said they were going to try to do. So we got a reputation for being very difficult, not difficult, but the hurdles were there high in order to be able to get funding. And what we've been able to see through that process is there's been a monumental change in the church. And I don't know that we're responsible for it, the people are responsible for it. But the quality, the variety, the professionalism of what's going on across Orthodoxy over the last 30 years has just improved exponentially. And what we've also seen as this is that one of the focuses we had was when organizations or in communities, at the grassroots level, or even at a jurisdictional level, came with an idea. We sort of said, oh, we didn't just say, that's a good idea, we'll fund it. We tried to figure out how it fits into the whole picture, into the mosaic of Orthodox Christianity in America. And so we really focused on make sure your project promotes unity, promotes the church happening. If you're doing something, are you involving the other communities? And we would put a lot of strings on that. And so what we started to see is a web, if you may, of Orthodox organizations at the grassroots level coming together across America. You might not see it. You might not know it's there, but we get to see it. I'm blessed to have a front row seat watching stuff happen in America across the jurisdictions. I remember when we started, there was just a few Orthodox Christian schools, and they were mostly Greek parochial schools. And now there's almost 100 Orthodox schools of all sizes and types, working in communities across the jurisdictions. And there's a lot of projects, humanitarian, mission-focused work at all levels. We were fortunate to be at the early days of Project Mexico, where it brings together people from youth from all Orthodox jurisdictions. And we started to see sort of what I would call, to borrow a term, facts on the ground of unity. And that was exciting, and it was really great. And I think during this period, we actually gave a grant to OCL because we wanted to, which was to support the OrthodoxNews.com website that had just been acquired, and we thought getting information out there was really important. So everything kind of fits into this mosaic of Orthodox happening in America, Orthodox unity at all levels. And so it's been a great journey. And so Proto-Deacons Peter's title, The Path to Orthodox Unity, is a good one. And what you'll see here, so what you'll see here is something that 20 years ago, when I started working at Farrer, I didn't dream I would see. Look, if you look around that table, that's the last assembly. There's 40 plus bishops around that table. And I know all of us were excited for unity over the years, those of us that have wanted it, and I know everybody in this room, that's what they've wanted. We wanted the bishops to come together. We were excited back when Ligonier happened, but that only had under 30 bishops. Every assembly here we've had is well over 40 in America. A lot more coverage. So that's something a little bit different. Ligonier was great, and I'll talk about it. But this is a special scene, and hopefully one that will go from an assembly to something even bigger as time goes on. But it is a path to unity that Proto-Deacon titled this, and I think it's a good one. Let's see if this remote works. So one of the things, he gave a great quote here, and I'll piggyback the quote from the Gospel of John, that they may become perfectly one, that the world will know that you have sent me. And I think that this was in Cleveland, so those are all Cleveland churches. So I'm sorry I don't have the San Francisco metro area churches, but I could have done some homework, but I didn't. But anyway, I think that's the ultimate goal, to be perfectly one. And I think that's the vision, and that's the focus. And that's where we're going. But really, this is a great slide here, that all of this is under construction. We're in a process. And you're going to hear me say that word a lot. It's a process. And I think that's an important thing to remember. And I'm going to quote something here in a second. But everything we're doing is something that hasn't been done before. And you can think this is somewhat monumental. If you study Alexei Krindach's numbers, and we've looked at them extensively in his Atlas of Orthodox Christian Churches, there's about 1 million of us. So we're pretty small. No matter, people may shoot these numbers, 5 million, 6 million, but really those that are engaged in the church, even on a peripheral level, there's about 1 million of us. And we're small, but there's still 1 million that you got to bring together that are disjointed and organized all over. That's not an easy task. So there's a lot to do. So what I'm going to talk about is a few topics here. Who started us down this path? Who's in charge of its construction? who are the architects and workers, what are the issues and obstacles, and the personal observations. He's got a slide on that, and I'm going to show you Frodo, Dick, and Peters, and I'll give you mine too. And they're not too far apart. So the Q&A with the bishops is Bishop, so Archbishop Nathaniel, and so I didn't change that slide. I think the big moment, for me, I've been fortunate because in working with all these Orthodox organizations, we don't just give money, but we serve as a consultant. And we give feedback and we work with them. So, you just, after 20 years, 20 plus years, you kind of get to know just about everybody in the church. And you're keeping an eye on things. And so we've got our nose in a lot of stuff. And I was reading back in October of 2008 that finally the bishops, the patriarchs, for a long time had never all gotten together in what they call a synaxis of the patriarchs. And somehow, because there's somebody with friction with somebody and nobody, they don't want to show. And a lot of times it's between Moscow and the ecumenical patriarch. But somehow things have gotten better, and so this is a perfect example. You don't know when God's going to act or a door is going to open. And in 2008, I was reading, shortly after, in October, a translation of what had come out from this gathering of all the patriarchs. And I was reading it, and I saw there's this long thing they put out, a common statement. And this was all the patriarchs were together. You can see there's a picture. They were together, and they signed the document. And in it, there was one paragraph that caught my eye that said, "Our desire for the swift healing of every canonical anomaly that has arisen from historical circumstances and pastoral requirements, such as the so-called Orthodox diaspora," which I like to put in the word so-called because a lot of bishops, including my own metropolitan, does not like the word diaspora. And so they called it so-called. It said, "With a view to overcoming every possible influence that is foreign to Orthodox ecclesiology, in this respect, we welcome the proposal by the Ecumenical Patriarchate to convene pan-Orthodox consultations within the coming year 2009 on this subject, as well as for the continuation of preparations for the Great and Holy Council." And so I saw that sentence. I didn't read it anywhere on anybody's website. I didn't read any commentary about it. And I wondered about it. So I called a friend of mine who was at that was a witness, that saw everybody sitting around the table. I said, "Did they just crack open a door?" And he goes, "I was the one that translated that. I can tell you, they kicked open a door. And something's going to happen. And something has to happen, because if you read it, they said that there's going to be a gathering 6 months later in 2009. And so, sure enough, that gathering occurred in Ligonier. I'm sorry, in Chambly, Switzerland. And the direct representative of all the patriarchs came together in the fourth preconciliar conference. And that's something to remember. It says fourth. And they, in a sense, put a period on the work of the first three. And they came up with the framework to do what the patriarchs have said. Come up with a way to solve the canonical anomalies of the so-called diaspora. And they came out with very good guidelines from the mother churches and they had rules, they had a decision, they're all on the Assembly's website, and they had detailed rules about what they wanted to see done and how these assemblies would work. And they actually gave a structure. And I remember when those came out and I saw the English translation, and you always make sure that it reads okay, because you never know on translations, and everybody assured me this was a great translation. And I sent it to a far-sighted bishop friend of mine who was like all of us, we're jaded, we're skeptical, we've seen starts and fits and starts, we've been through the wars, we get our hopes up and then they're dashed, like with Ligonier, and we start and so you're jaded a little. And I asked this bishop, what do you think? He's one that really wants orthodoxy to happen, he has vision. And he looked at it, he read it, and I still have the email. He goes, "This is actually good." Because actually, this is really good. He was in shock. And he said, I think this has some hope. And so, and the beauty of it was that it wasn't just, they didn't create a church, they created a process. And by the way, the process had an end. So it wasn't an open-ended deal. It said, it will end, these assemblies end at this so-called Great and Holy Council. And so that created a lot of hope. That something was going to be there and that there was a structure in place. So I was very fortunate to be involved in the early planning and structure of how this thing would come together. And it finally did come together. And the first thing you had to do was they said you've got to have this gathering every year called an assembly. And the assembly would bring all the bishops of a given territory. And there's 14 autocephalous churches in the world, or autonomous, that are part of the so-called mother churches. There's 14 of them that were part of Chambasy, that are all working together on this. In the United States, of the 14, 8 mother churches are basically represented. We have like 13 or 14 jurisdictions, but some of them are under one of the 8 mother churches. So they had created around the world about 14 different assemblies all over the world. And the United States is one of them. But they actually created an assembly. Ours was North America, which included Canada and Mexico and Central America. And if you look at the name of the current assembly, it still says that. But basically, they created these assemblies. They said all the canonical bishops of the churches will be members of the assembly, and they'll all come together. And they are supposed to do certain things. And they said there are certain things you're supposed to do. One is to safeguard and contribute to the unity of the Orthodox Church in the region in theological, ecclesiological, canonical, spiritual, philanthropic, educational, and missionary obligations. So come together and contribute and coordinate. The coordination of leadership of activities of common interest in areas of pastoral care, catechesis, liturgical life, religious publishing, mass media, religious education, again, assembly, focusing on that. Relation with other Christian churches and other religions. Anything that entails obligations of the Orthodox Church in the relations with society and government. And finally, the preparation of a plan to organize the Orthodox of the region on a canonical basis. So there were these 5 things, one of the biggest of which is to prepare a plan on how to organize the church in the region, with the end game being present that plan to the Great and Holy Council, whenever that may be. So it really gave specific tasks and the blessings from the mother churches, which is significantly different than what happened at Ligonier. Ligonier was great. There was energy, there was passion, there was a feeling. But what it didn't have was the blessing of the mother churches, and so you had people getting cold feet, people getting reprimanded for participating. Bishops. It wasn't like this, which they said go. They said go, do it, you have your blessing. Now we had free reign to make it happen. So in May 2010, there was the first assembly. Now, remember, up until this time, we had tries of unity. We had an organization, the Standing Conference of Orthodox Bishops in the Americas, SCOBA. SCOBA was not an assembly of bishops. SCOBA was an organization of hierarchs. And it was just the primates of the churches. And SCOBA was of the jurisdictions that were here. That's all that was there. And normally when they met, the hierarchs weren't always at the meetings. They'd send a representative. There was no organization of all bishops in America. So when the bishops, and I have this bad habit of saying these guys, and unfortunately I had to speak at the third assembly, and I said you guys like 3 times. And more bishops came and spoke in my ear and said, just wanted to tell you, you did a great job, but don't call us you guys. So anyway, so I did it again, and I apologize to whoever's there hearing it. But when they came together, the first assembly included Canada, Mexico, bishops. It was 60-some bishops gathered. They came. There wasn't people not showing except for a few, for very good reasons. Usually, some illness or something like that. When they gathered that first time, they didn't really know each other, except for the primates. Very few of them knew each other. Some might have knew each other from seminary days or ran into each other, but it was almost like a whole new thing. So a lot of it was spent kind of get to know you, not deal with much detail, because you got to get trust. You got to get relationships built. How can you deal with big issues if you don't know each other? So it was much more, it was an initial organization issue and a building of trust, the beginnings of trust. So that first assembly was in New York City. They did do some action. They first decided, Canada requested that, listen, we have a different culture, a different structure. The Canadian bishops are already kind of functioning together and they meet. Can we be our own assembly? And the assembly said, sure, we approve that. And the same thing happened with Mexico and the Spanish-speaking countries. They would fit better to South America. So that request, the assembly all voted to make that request. Take it. The process in the structure is that when you need something, to change from what's in the decision and the rules, then you take it back to the mother churches. And so they took it back up through the chairman of the Synaxis of Patriarchs, which is the ecumenical patriarch, and said, we request that these two things be split up. Then what he did was he sent letters to all the patriarchates and said, we need your blessing, because he can't unilaterally approve anything, which is good news for those that think he does that. Because he didn't, and he wouldn't. He said, I can't approve. He told Bishop Basil, who's the head of the secretariat, I can't approve it without everybody else weighing in. So that's actually good news. The bad news is everything's slow motion. And the mother churches, a couple of the mother churches said, listen, we're not going to bless anything. We think that you need to have a synaxis of primates again to bless a request like this, and that's holding everything up. So basically, de facto, Canada's functioning like its own assembly, even though they're still under the umbrella. And basically, the U.S. is now functioning de facto as its own assembly. And from that point forward, instead of 60-some bishops coming, we have 52 right now, because we have a lot of new bishops, total bishops that are U.S. bishops. There's one in Canada, one in Mexico that has U.S. churches in that number. So we have about 52 total, and since that time, the others don't come. And that's why, sometimes if you ever read the minutes and you see we have a total amount attended out of the total grand total, it's not because people didn't show. It's because Canada is doing their own thing, and it just messes with the numbers. But bottom line is they did that. They also basically assumed responsibility for SCOBA's operations. And primarily what SCOBA brought to the table, it had been an attempt at unity, but as you can see, it hadn't really happened. But what it did do well was things like IOCC, OCMC, Orthodox Christian Prison Ministry, OCF. It had done well in getting agencies that brought people together across the jurisdictions and did projects. So there's agencies and endorsed organizations that it had worked with, and the assembly assumed those processes and assumed the oversight, and the assembly assigned bishops to be the episcopal overseers for each of the agencies that are under SCOBA, that were under SCOBA. And that continues to this day. So basically, it was a structural deal. One of the big things that the first assembly did was get the committee structure. The structure under Thomas C. was designed to create a process. So in the rules, they said you got a lot of work to do. If you're going to prepare a plan to organize the Orthodox of the region on a canonical basis, you got work to do. You got 1 million people. You got 13 or 14 jurisdictions. You got legal structures every which way. You got some jurisdictions really organized. You got some jurisdictions not organized. Some with wonderful legal teams and policies that deal with sexual misconduct and all the issues of the day. You got some that haven't even thought about it. You got property owned every which way. You need to form some committees to figure out what you have. We've got pastoral practices that are all over the place. Some jurisdictions deal with divorce one way, some another. If you're going to bring it together, you've got a lot of issues. So they said form committees. And so the basic structure of the committees was put together, and a secretariat was organized at the First Assembly. And when that secretariat was organized, it became tasked with the primary job of trying to keep the day-to-day operations of the assembly going. It's kind of 50-some bishops is like herding cats, keeping everybody on task, making sure people do their job. It's monumental. So the secretariat was charged with the day-to-day operations. And remember, again, nobody really knew each other. So trust has to be built. That takes time. You know, Archbishop Demetrius and Bishop Basil didn't know each other originally. Archbishop Demetrius of the GOA is the chairman of the assembly. Just to get to know each other takes a little time and get that trust level built. But it started to happen. So the first assembly was organizational. The second one started to really focus on getting the committees to do their job, to work, to focus. The third assembly was really starting to roll up their sleeves, and I'll talk about this in a minute, on what the church is going to look like in America if you bring it together, when you bring it together, what it's going to look like, and started to make the bishops start thinking about it and let them weigh in on what they like and might like or don't like. By the fourth assembly, it delved even deeper, and I'll show you kind of where it's gone since then. And that's when it really got roll up your sleeves. So these committees, this is a list of the committees. And there was a lot of them. I think there's 13 committees, some of which were suggested by Chalmers and some of which were U.S. Our own ideas. And basically, canonical affairs, dealing with all kinds of issues and preparing lists of, even having a list of what priests are canonical and which ones are not. Where jurisdictions might have had a problem with the priest, he's no longer a priest, and then they find their way into another jurisdiction because they never heard of him and didn't know that was a problem. And with all the rules of sexual misconduct and all the issues out there, a bad person could show up somewhere else. And so just building a database was important. Canonical regional planning, we'll talk about that. That is the guts of it all. Really, if you did it with a hub and a spoke, everything's about canonical regional planning with the assembly and what the church is supposed to look like. All the rest of the committees feed into that. They all have to do work that feeds into the whole basic game plan when it's all said and done. Church and society is one. Clergy matters. It used to be called clergy affairs, and we decided we didn't like that. Ecumenical relations, dealing not only with other Christians, but in particular are the ones that are closest, the Oriental Orthodox, and then out there the Roman Catholics and the rest of the church. Financial affairs, which is a committee that has a lot of CPA types and investment types on it. We found Orthodox priests that are CPAs, and that committee is working real hard to make sure that you have total transparency and best practices as an example to all the other jurisdictions on how an organization should be done. So you will see financial statements published. We're right in the middle of the first audit of the assembly, so that didn't have much activity. But even then, the first audit always takes the longest, and they're a little slow, but it's about done. Making sure the budgets, everything's out on the website. So all that stuff's going to be out there, and that committee's making sure that it develops the best practices that may be good examples in the interim for all the jurisdictions. Legal affairs, we have almost 17 lawyers from every jurisdiction rolling up their sleeves. You can't imagine, but the issues of bringing all this together are so complex. And first of all, it's figuring out what we got. Properties owned in all kinds of weird names, and maybe in the name of a bishop that was dead 2 generations ago. To pull it all together, we brought together a team, an all-star team, I think, of people. A lot of the lawyers we needed, that were experts on mergers and acquisitions. Because if you think about this from a corporate perspective, it's like a giant corporate merger. and the details of bringing together. Mergers are huge. Frankly, we don't want the Great and Holy Council next week or 2 years, even a year from now. There's a lot of work to be done to figure out what you got. Think about all the organizations, some of which are not well organized, the entities that are owned by jurisdictions, how they're structured. How do you bring all this together in a way? And how do you really got to study all the parishes a little bit too, because you don't want, when you bring it together, parishes being able to say, I'm out of here. And you start having schism. So there's a lot of things to consider. Legal Affairs has a lot of work to do, and so forth. The Committee on Liturgy. We're not saying everybody has to be totally uniform, but get to a commonality and approach. Military chaplaincy, monastic communities. We have now 29 plus different ones. That's a new thing on our terrain in America. Just like Orthodox schools, the growth of monasticism, but understanding what we have. Pastoral practice is huge. That committee, and these committees, by the way, are all listed on the website with who's involved. Pastoral Practices Committee has a huge task, because if they've identified, I don't know what the number is, 20 or 30 practices where it differs among the jurisdictions on basic things, that if they can talk about it and figure it out, they can start working that through and making sure that there's some consistency, especially in handling of divorces and remarriages. And if you went through the list, there's actually, that committee's produced, I think it's a 190-some page report on issues that are going to have to be looked through. That's all time-consuming. Theological education, and the Committee for Youth, which has probably been the most active committee and really focused and been doing a lot, which probably makes everybody feel good. That needs to be a priority. So the Committee for Youth, headed by Bishop Thomas of the Antiochian Archdiocese, has been very active. Coming out of this last assembly, one of the exciting things they agreed to is to have this committee plan to make a proposal at the next committee for a major national youth gathering of the entire youth and Orthodoxy in America. So that's in the planning process. They're planning for a plan, I think. But no, actually they're planning it so to present it to get approved at the next assembly. And so that's how that works. The way these committees work, the bishops kind of suggested who they wanted to help them. These committees actually have people who are assisting them, lay people and clergy. So the committees are made up of the bishops. It's the bishops' assembly. But we all know to make all of this happen, it's going to have to be a synergetic effort of all people, clergy, laity, the episcopate, together. Anybody without the other one, it isn't going to happen. Everybody has to be on board. We have tremendous talent. We have tremendous expertise in Orthodoxy in America. We need to tap it. And so the committees have what they call consultant advisors, who are basically helping the committee, these committees do their work. Some committees have been more active than others. Some have really taken to their task. Others have been slow getting out of the block. Part of the job of the Secretariat has been to find ways to make sure everybody gets engaged and gets focused, and that's a daily task. You remember, and if you looked at the website, by the way, you will see committees, you will see consultants listed, and if you add that up with all the bishops, you get to an operation of almost 190 people trying to work toward Orthodox unity. Now that's a monster task, operated by all volunteers right now. The assembly has no paid staff. It doesn't have somebody that wakes up in the morning thinking about the assembly, thinking about operating it. It doesn't have anybody. There's no person that's their only task. The bishops all have their jobs to do when they leave. And they all have their jurisdictions in their dioceses. They have their jobs. All the volunteers, the priests have parishes, and all the volunteers have other jobs. They have day jobs. So everybody's volunteering. It isn't 190 people, but pulling it all together is a monster right now. And so these committees, the Secretariat, if you go to the website and you look up the committees, you will see that that was developed. Each committee has what they call terms of reference that lays out what its job is, what it's supposed to do. Each committee has a facilitator. And the facilitator's job is to help the bishop actually do the work. So a lot of the bishops are so busy to call a meeting, to make sure everybody's doing their job. So we've just asked them to get a facilitator to actually do the work for the bishop. And finally, they have a liaison from the secretariat who bugs the committee to make sure they're doing their job all the time, keeps track of them, and keeps the linkage going, and makes sure there's reporting. So we tried to build an infrastructure because the work of the assembly that feeds into canonical regional planning is going to come. It comes from the committees, and so we have all these committees that you can see with clergy and lay people. They've been meeting and at various times, as sometimes, like I said, some committees are better than others at coming together. But, one of the things I like to say is that even if Ligonier had happened, and they'd all come together, it resulted in, hey, we're going to be one church, we're going to be unified. There's something that would have had to be done no matter what. You couldn't get away from it, which is the hard work of rolling up your sleeves and figuring out how to bring all this together and structuring 1 million people with jurisdictions with various practices and bringing it together in some way that works and builds consensus. And that hard work of rolling up the sleeves was going to have to be done either way, and that hard work is going to take a long time to do. It's a lot to be done. If you see any major organization bring multiple organizations together, even if it's two that are very well organized organizations, it's a lot of work to merge them together. Think about here where we have not well organized organizations, disorganized, bringing it together. So the hard work of rolling up the sleeves is what's happening at the committee levels, and it's going to take time. And it's not sexy. It's not even newsworthy. It's not interesting. It's just work. And that's what's having to go on. So kind of some of the things that the foundation for this common work are going on. One is developing a financial base. Like I said, right now it's all volunteers. How can you move a monumental organization forward on all volunteers? So we've got to get a financial base in place. There's been some good donors, but there's no giant donor, just I love the assembly, I'm going to give you $1 million. But so we've got to get funding so that we can get the organization to get somebody on staff that wakes up in the morning and they're thinking about, do I need to bug that committee chair to get their job done, that committee chair? Get it functioning daily. We've brought on a communication person to try to get the communication better, to get the website out. We had some donations for that. Sante Loisis is doing an incredible job. She did in Cleveland, organizing that so that we could get the word out. But this assembly is probably going to be funded by the jurisdictions do put money in, but it covers the assembly meeting, which is expensive to gather 40, 50 bishops every year. But generally, the rest of the operations we need from the church at large, and we're working on that, and we're just putting the plea out. I put the latest, greatest brochure, I think, was at the table back there that just came out. Actually, it's the first brochure, not just the latest, greatest. And basically, it's going to be, we learned with the Obama campaign, $10 and $20 and $50 from all the people who wanted it to happen turned out to be big dollars. And I think that's going to happen in the church. We want the word to get out. $10, $20, $100, $200 will make a difference. Yeah, we want large donations. But frankly, the best message that could go to all the bishops that this is serious among the laity is for just a large base of laity to contribute to this function so that we can bring on staff the people that can make this thing happen. They're creating a canonical registry, like we said, on that committee of all, who's a canonical bishop or priest, so that bishops can go to it when they're faced with a decision. Documenting clergy issues of pastoral practice. Like I said, there's a 190 plus report documenting, and then they're going to start figuring out at that committee what to do about it. Activities, social issues. Finally, we were able to get one of the committees, Church and Society, really to stand up and start putting together responses and dealing proactively with the world at large. It took almost 4 years to do it, but that committee is now active, and if you look at the website of the assembly, you'll see that at the last assembly meeting, 2 statements were put out, one on same-sex marriage and one on the situation in these Orthodox countries with Orthodox persecution by the assembly, that committee was helped to spearhead, and now they're starting to meet regularly, and it took a while to get it going because everything's slow, but at least I think we're going to be a little bit more proactive publicly. Legal issues, like I said, different approaches to youth, monastics, developing organizational approaches and models to address canonical anomaly. And so these are the kind of the focus that has been going on at Protodeacon listed. And I'm going to point out what the biggest one, which is the Committee for Canonical Planning. And basically that committee, headed by Archbishop Nicolai of the Romanian Archdiocese, was tasked with to put together that proposal for an organization. Remember, again, the main task of the assembly is to prepare, one of the main tasks, is to prepare a plan to go to this great and holy council. A plan. And that plan is what this committee is working on. So they've been looking at all kinds of models about what will our church look like if we bring it together. How would it look like as one church? And they went out and they kind of started looking at different alternatives, and they basically, at the last assembly, came up with an idea. And it wasn't a final, it wasn't even intended to be the idea, but something to get everybody talking, like a straw man. How does this look to you? How does this look? I almost said you guys. How did this look? And what is your feedback? And they've asked the committee for the assembly to give them feedback.